What if something with no active ingredient could still produce measurable change in the body? For a long time, the placebo effect was treated as noise, a statistical inconvenience in clinical trials, something to subtract, something to control for. But the more carefully scientists studied it, the clearer it became. This was not noise. It was biology responding to context, to expectation, to the ritual of care itself. Tonight, we will move slowly through 101 facts about what the placebo effect truly is, how it was discovered, how it is measured, where it works, where it doesn't, and why every modern drug must prove it can outperform it. No exaggeration, no mysticism, just the quiet science of how the brain and body interpret treatment. So close your eyes and let your shoulders soften, because what we are exploring is not illusion, it is one of medicine's most humbling baselines. The word placebo comes from a Latin phrase meaning, "I shall please," but its history is older and more winding than most people know. The word first appeared centuries ago, tucked inside a medieval psalm, Placebo Domino in regione vivorum, meaning, "I shall please the Lord in the land of the living." Over time, the word drifted. It became a term for a flatterer, someone who said pleasing things without meaning them. And only later, much later, did it find its way into the language of medicine. It is a word that has traveled a long road to get here, changing shape with every century, picking up new meaning the way rivers pick up stones. And now it rests in the vocabulary of science, carrying all of that quiet history within it. A word born in devotion, shaped by skepticism, and finally adopted by a field that is still learning what it truly means. Even the name, you see, has layers. And perhaps that is fitting because the thing it describes has layers too, ones we are only beginning to unfold. A placebo is a treatment that contains no active therapeutic ingredient. It might be a sugar pill made of nothing more than lactose and a thin, smooth coating. It might be a saline injection, salt water pressed gently into a vein. It might even be a sham procedure performed with all the ceremony of real surgery but without the actual intervention. In every case, the placebo carries nothing that should, by any known chemical mechanism, produce a change in the body. And yet it does. That is the quiet mystery at the heart of this word. The treatment is empty in a material sense. There is no molecule doing the work, no compound unlocking a receptor. But the body responds anyway, as though something meaningful has arrived. It is as if the ritual itself, the pill, the needle, the careful hands of a provider, speaks a language the body understands, one that has nothing to do with chemistry and everything to do with something older and softer, something closer to trust. The placebo effect is the measurable improvement in a person's condition that occurs after receiving one of these inert treatments. And the key word there is measurable. This is not a matter of someone simply saying they feel a little better. The placebo effect has been observed in blood pressure readings, in heart rate monitors, in brain scans glowing with activity. It has been documented in laboratories and hospitals across the world, noted in the careful handwriting of researchers who expected nothing and found something they could not easily explain. The improvement is real. It shows up in data. It leaves its fingerprints on the instruments of science. And what makes it so remarkable is that it arrives without any physical cause, or at least without the kind of cause we are used to looking for. The body simply begins to heal, gently, quietly, as if someone whispered permission and the cells decided to listen. It is one of the most well-documented phenomena in modern medicine, and still, after decades, one of the least fully understood. The placebo effect is not imaginary. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand as we begin. For a long time, there was a tendency to dismiss it, to wave it away as wishful thinking, as the mind playing tricks on the body, as something that happened only to people who were easily fooled. But that understanding has changed, slowly and irreversibly. What researchers have found again and again is that the placebo effect produces real, observable physiological changes. The heart rate shifts, the blood pressure lowers, neurons fire in patterns that can be seen on a screen. Hormones are released into the bloodstream, not because a drug asked them to, but because something else did, something quieter, something rooted in expectation and belief. The body does not distinguish between a real pill and a convincing one the way the mind might. It simply responds. And that response is as physical, as tangible, as anything a drug could produce. The placebo effect is not a failure of perception. It is a feature of biology. Placebos have been documented to affect heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity, and hormone levels. Let that settle in for a moment. These are not vague or subjective things. These are the instruments of the body's deepest machinery, the rhythm of the heart, the pressure of blood moving through your veins, the flickering electrical symphonies inside your skull. And placebos can touch all of them. In studies where participants were given inert treatments they believed to be real, researchers have watched blood pressure drop on a monitor. They have watched cortisol levels shift in a blood sample. They have watched the brain light up on an MRI, responding to nothing more than a sugar pill and the quiet expectation that relief was on its way. It is as though the body has a second pharmacy, one that does not require a prescription, one that opens its doors when belief walks in. And the medicines it dispenses are not metaphors. They are molecules, real and measurable, released into the bloodstream by the brain itself. The modern scientific study of the placebo effect is widely credited to an anesthesiologist named Henry Beecher, whose landmark 1955 paper, The Powerful Placebo, helped establish the phenomenon as a serious variable in medical research. Beecher was not a mystic or a philosopher. He was a man of operating rooms and measured doses, a clinician trained in the hard edges of wartime medicine. And yet it was precisely that experience, the blood and urgency and impossible decisions of war, that opened his eyes to something softer. His paper argued that placebos were not just noise in the data, not just something to be filtered out and forgotten. They were a force, a real one. And medicine, he suggested, needed to account for it. That paper changed the way clinical trials were designed. It planted a seed that would grow into one of the most fascinating and humbling fields in all of medical science. One man, writing from the aftermath of war, asking a question that medicine is still trying to answer. Beecher's interest in the placebo effect grew from his experience treating wounded soldiers during World War II. The story is often told simply, that he ran out of morphine and gave saline instead, and the soldiers felt relief. But modern historians note that this popular version is likely a simplified or embellished retelling of his actual wartime observations. What is not in dispute is that Beecher witnessed something powerful during those years, something about the relationship between expectation, context, and the experience of pain that he could not set aside. The battlefield gave him a question, the laboratory gave him the tools to pursue it, and the pursuit changed medicine. It is a reminder that some of the most important scientific insights do not begin in clean, quiet rooms. They begin in chaos, in urgency, in the desperate human need to ease suffering, and in the willingness of one thoughtful person to notice what others might have overlooked. Placebo-controlled trials are now the gold standard in medical research for testing the effectiveness of new drugs. This means that before a medication can be approved for widespread use, it must prove that it works better than a placebo, better than the body's own quiet response to the ritual of treatment. This is a remarkable thing if you pause to consider it. The placebo effect is so powerful, so consistent, that science had to build an entire methodology around it, not to harness it, but simply to account for it. Every drug you have ever taken has been measured against this invisible force. Every treatment that sits on a pharmacy shelf has had to outperform the body's own belief in healing. The placebo is not the opponent of medicine. It is the baseline, the quiet hum against which every new melody must prove itself. And the fact that so many drugs succeed is a testament to science. But the fact that the baseline exists at all is a testament to something else entirely. In a typical clinical trial, one group of participants receives the real treatment, while another group receives a placebo. Neither group knows which they have been given. This is the architecture of modern medicine, built carefully to separate what a drug does from what the mind believes a drug does. The participants swallow the same looking pill, receive the same careful instructions, sit in the same waiting rooms under the same fluorescent lights. Everything is identical except the invisible thing inside the capsule. And then the researchers wait and watch and measure. They are looking for a difference, a gap between the two groups that proves the drug carries something real. But what is quietly extraordinary is that both groups often improve. The placebo group, the group that received nothing of chemical value, often gets better too. Not always as much, not always in the same way, but enough to remind us that the ritual of care itself carries a kind of medicine, one that no pill can fully replace. When both the participants and the researchers are unaware of who is receiving the real treatment and who is receiving the placebo, the study is called a double-blind trial. This is considered one of the most rigorous designs in all of science, and it exists because of something beautifully human: the tendency of people, even trained scientists, to see what they hope to see. If a researcher knows that a patient is receiving the real drug, they might unconsciously interpret the results more favorably. If a patient knows they are receiving the placebo, their body might respond less, and so the blindfold is placed over both sets of eyes, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for the power of expectation and for the quiet, persistent influence of belief. The double-blind trial is, in a sense, a love letter to the placebo effect. It is science saying, "You are so strong, so real, so woven into the fabric of human experience that we must design our most careful experiments around you." The placebo effect is not limited to pills. It has been observed with sham surgeries, fake acupuncture needles, inactive medical devices, and even pretend diagnostic procedures. Anywhere the body encounters the architecture of care, the white coat, the sterile room, the confident hands of a provider, the placebo effect can bloom. Sham acupuncture, where needles are placed at random points or do not actually pierce the skin, has produced measurable relief in pain studies. Fake medical devices, designed to look and feel like real therapeutic machines, have improved symptoms in clinical trials. And sham surgeries, where a patient is sedated, an incision is made but no actual procedure is performed, have, in some remarkable cases, produced results equal to the real operation. The body does not seem to care what form the treatment takes. It cares that the treatment arrived. It cares that someone showed up and said, in some language or another, "I am here to help you heal." The strength of the placebo effect can vary widely depending on the condition being treated, the individual, and the context in which the treatment is given. Not everyone responds to placebos in the same way. Some people experience dramatic improvement, others feel nothing at all, and the conditions themselves seem to matter. Pain, depression, nausea, and fatigue tend to be more responsive to placebos than conditions like cancer or broken bones, where the damage is structural and unyielding. The context plays a role too. A placebo delivered by a warm, attentive physician in a calm, well-lit clinic tends to work better than one handed over in silence. It is as though the effect is not a single thing but a tapestry woven from threads of expectation, trust, biology, and environment. Pull one thread and the pattern shifts. Change the setting, the provider, the patient's history, and the placebo responds. Growing stronger here, fading there, always reflecting the quiet, complex relationship between a person and the world that surrounds them. When a person takes a placebo and expects relief, the brain can release endorphins, the body's own natural painkillers. These are not metaphorical medicines. Endorphins are real molecules, produced deep within the brain, and they are among the most powerful pain-relieving substances the body knows how to make. They bind to the same receptors that morphine does. They quiet the signals of distress, soften the sharp edges of discomfort, and pour a kind of warm stillness into the nervous system. And the remarkable thing is that a placebo, a sugar pill, a saline drip, a treatment with no active ingredient at all, can ask the brain to release them, not by chemistry, not by force, but by expectation alone. The person believes that relief is coming, and the brain, listening to that belief as though it were a prescription, opens its own pharmacy and begins dispensing something real. It is one of the most quietly astonishing things the human body can do, to heal itself, not because something was given, but because something was believed. Brain imaging studies have shown that placebos activate many of the same brain regions as real medications. When a person takes a painkiller that works, certain areas of the brain light up on a scan, regions involved in pain modulation, reward, and emotional regulation. And when a person takes a placebo they believe to be that same painkiller, many of those same regions light up in nearly the same way. The brain does not seem to distinguish, at least not entirely, between the drug and the expectation of the drug. It responds to both with a similar symphony of activity, firing neurons, releasing chemicals, adjusting the delicate balance of signals that determine how much pain a person feels. This is not the brain being fooled. This is the brain doing what it has always done, responding to information, to context, to the meaning it assigns to the world around it. The placebo does not bypass the brain. It speaks directly to it, in a language the brain already knows. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most involved in planning, expectation, and decision-making, plays a central role in generating the placebo response. This region sits just behind your forehead, and it is one of the most distinctly human parts of the brain. The area that allows you to imagine the future, to weigh possibilities, to expect. And it is precisely this ability to expect that seems to drive the placebo effect. When a person receives a treatment and anticipates improvement, the prefrontal cortex becomes active, sending signals to other parts of the brain that regulate pain, emotion, and bodily function. It is as though expectation itself is a kind of instruction, a message sent from the thinking brain to the feeling body saying, "Relief is on the way, you can begin to let go." The prefrontal cortex does not create the healing, but it opens the door for it quietly, like someone turning down the lights in a room so that rest can finally begin. Placebo painkillers have been shown to trigger activity in the brain's descending pain modulation system, a network that naturally suppresses pain signals before they reach conscious awareness. This system is one of the body's most elegant defenses. It works by sending signals downward from the brain into the spinal cord, intercepting pain messages before they can climb to the surface of experience, and placebos can activate it. When a person believes they have received a painkiller, the brain engages this descending system, dampening the volume of incoming pain, softening it before it arrives. The pain does not disappear, but it becomes quieter, more distant, like a sound heard through a closed door. This is not the body imagining less pain. This is the body actively reducing it, using a system that evolved long before medicine existed. A system designed to protect, to soothe, to whisper to the nerves that everything is going to be all right. The neurotransmitter dopamine, which is closely associated with reward and pleasure, is released during placebo responses in conditions like Parkinson's disease. Dopamine is one of the brain's most important chemical messengers. It is the molecule behind motivation, behind the feeling of satisfaction when something good happens, behind the quiet glow of anticipation when you expect something pleasant. And in Parkinson's disease, where dopamine-producing cells are slowly lost, the stakes of this molecule are especially high. Researchers have found that when Parkinson's patients receive a placebo they believe to be real medication, their brains release dopamine, not because a drug commanded it, but because the expectation of improvement was enough to coax the brain into producing what it was running low on. It is a tender finding, almost unbearably so. The brain, even in illness, even when so much has been lost, still reaches for its own medicine, summoned not by chemistry but by the quiet, persistent stirring of hope. In studies on Parkinson's patients, placebos that patients believed were medication triggered significant dopamine release in a brain region called the striatum. The striatum is deeply involved in movement and reward, two of the very things that Parkinson's disease slowly takes away. And yet, when patients expected their medication to work, brain scans showed dopamine flooding this exact area even though the treatment they had received was inert. The striatum responded as if the real drug had arrived. The motor circuits flickered to life. The patients moved a little more easily, felt a little more fluid for a time. It is important to be honest about this. The relief is often temporary, and it does not replace the real medication that these patients need. But it reveals something profound about the brain's capacity to mobilize its own resources when it believes that help has come. Even a brain in decline still listens for the sound of rescue, and sometimes hearing it begins to rescue itself. The placebo effect can also involve the release of endocannabinoids, the body's own cannabis-like molecules. Most people know about cannabinoids from the plant world, from the compounds found in cannabis that ease pain and calm anxiety. But the body produces its own version of these molecules naturally and without any external substance. They are part of the endocannabinoid system, a vast network of receptors and signals that helps regulate pain, mood, appetite, and inflammation. And researchers have found that placebo treatments can trigger their release. When a person expects relief and receives a convincing placebo, the brain may respond by producing endocannabinoids, gently quieting the pain and easing the body into a softer state. It is another example of the body's hidden pharmacy, a system that does not wait for the right drug to arrive, but instead begins mixing its own remedy the moment it believes that healing has begun. The body, it seems, has always known how to soothe itself. It simply waits for the right moment to begin. Cholecystokinin, often called CCK, is a hormone closely linked to anxiety and the anticipation of harm, and it plays a role not in the placebo effect, but in its darker twin, the nocebo effect, which we will visit later. When a person expects a treatment to fail or fears that it will cause pain, CCK levels can rise, amplifying the very discomfort the person dreads. It is the body's alarm system, tuned not just to real threats, but to imagined ones, to the quiet dread that whispers before the needle touches the skin. CCK is a reminder that the same mechanism that allows belief to heal can also allow fear to wound. The brain does not only listen to hope, it listens to everything. And when the message it receives is one of anxiety, it responds with equal faithfulness, releasing molecules that make the fear feel real. The body does not judge the messages it receives, it simply acts on them with the same quiet obedience it brings to every signal, every expectation, every whispered story about what is going to happen next. A drug called naloxone, which blocks opioid receptors in the brain, has been shown to partially block the pain relief produced by placebos. This is one of the most important findings in placebo research because it provides direct chemical evidence that real endorphins are involved. Here is how it works. A person receives a placebo and reports feeling less pain. Then, in a separate trial, the same person receives a placebo alongside naloxone, and this time the pain relief is diminished or absent. The naloxone blocks the opioid receptors and the placebo's power fades. This tells researchers something remarkable, that the pain relief was not just in the person's mind, it was in their bloodstream. Real endorphins had been released, real opioid receptors had been activated, and a real chemical pathway had been set in motion, all by a treatment that contained nothing. Naloxone is the lock that proves the key existed. And the key was made not by a pharmaceutical company, but by the brain itself, forged in the quiet workshop of expectation. Functional MRI studies have shown that placebo treatments can reduce activity in pain-processing areas of the brain, including the thalamus, the insula, and the anterior cingulate cortex. These are regions that light up when a person is in pain. They are part of the brain's alarm system, the network that takes a signal from the body and turns it into the experience of suffering. And placebos can turn them down. When a person takes a placebo they believe will ease their pain, these regions grow quieter on the scan. The thalamus, which acts as a relay station for sensory information, passes along softer messages. The insula, which is involved in the emotional dimension of pain, calms. The anterior cingulate cortex, which helps determine how much a person cares about the pain they feel, lowers its voice. The result is not numbness, it is something more like gentleness. The brain choosing, in response to belief, to interpret the same signals with a lighter touch, to turn down the volume on its own alarm. Placebo responses have been linked to changes in the autonomic nervous system, including shifts in heart rate variability and skin conductance. The autonomic nervous system is the part of you that runs without your permission, the part that keeps your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your skin sweating when you are nervous. It is the body's autopilot, and it does not usually take requests, but placebos can reach it. Studies have shown that when a person receives a placebo and expects calm, their heart rate variability, a measure of the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, can shift toward a more relaxed state. Skin conductance, which reflects the activity of sweat glands and is often used as a measure of stress, can decrease. These are not things a person can consciously control. They are the body's deepest responses running beneath the surface of awareness. And the placebo somehow speaks to them. It reaches past the conscious mind, past the thinking self, and touches the machinery that hums below, whispering in a voice the nervous system understands that it is safe now. that it can rest. The brain does not simply trick itself when it responds to a placebo. The placebo effect involves measurable neurobiological pathways that overlap with those activated by real, pharmacologically active drugs. This is a crucial distinction. For decades, the placebo effect was dismissed as self-deception, as the brain being fooled into feeling better. But modern neuroscience has revealed something far more interesting. The pathways that light up during a placebo response are not imaginary. They are the same pathways that activate when a real drug is at work, the same endorphin systems, the same dopamine circuits, the same descending pain modulation networks. The only difference is the trigger. In one case, a molecule from outside the body starts the chain reaction. In the other, a belief does. The endpoint is remarkably similar. The brain is not being tricked. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do, responding to information, adjusting its chemistry, preparing the body for what it believes is coming. It is not a trick. It is a feature, one of the oldest and most faithful features the brain has. Serotonin pathways have also been implicated in the placebo response, particularly in the treatment of depression. Serotonin is often called the brain's mood molecule. It helps regulate feelings of well-being, calm, and emotional stability. Many antidepressant medications work by increasing the amount of serotonin available in the brain, and research has found that placebos given to people with depression can produce changes in serotonin-related brain activity that mirror, in part, the effects of real antidepressants. The person takes a pill that contains nothing, believes it to be medicine, and the brain begins adjusting its serotonin system, not because a chemical forced it to, but because something in the act of receiving treatment, in the hope of getting better, signaled the brain to begin its own quiet repair. It is not a replacement for medication when medication is needed, but it is a window into the depth of the relationship between belief and brain chemistry. A reminder that the mind and the brain are not separate things, but partners in an ancient, unending conversation. The neurochemistry of the placebo effect suggests that the brain contains a built-in pharmacy, one that can be activated by expectation, context, and belief. Endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoids, these are not obscure chemicals. They are the body's primary tools for managing pain, mood, reward, and calm. And the placebo effect can mobilize all of them, not reliably, not in every person, not for every condition, but often enough and powerfully enough to change the way science understands the boundary between mind and body. The brain does not wait passively for medicine to arrive from the outside world. It carries its own supply, stored in neural pathways and receptor sites, ready to be released when the right signal comes. And sometimes, that signal is not a molecule. It is a moment, a doctor's reassuring voice, a pill placed in the palm, a feeling of being cared for. The pharmacy opens not because of what is in the treatment, but because of what is in the person. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful chemistry of all. Pain is the most widely studied domain of the placebo effect, though researchers are careful to note that the picture is more complex than it first appears. Some of the apparent strength of the placebo effect in pain studies is influenced by factors like natural symptom fluctuation, the simple fact that pain comes and goes on its own, and regression to the mean, which is the statistical tendency for extreme symptoms to move back toward average levels over time. These are not flaws in the research, but important reminders that the placebo effect does not exist in isolation. It is woven into the natural rhythm of the body, rising and falling alongside the tides of illness and recovery. Still, even after accounting for these factors, a genuine placebo response remains, a real, measurable change in how the brain processes pain. The body is always fluctuating, always adjusting, but the placebo gives it a direction, a gentle nudge, a whisper that says, "This way, toward relief." And the body, more often than not, listens. Studies show that placebo treatments can reduce self-reported pain by an average of approximately 20 to 30% in many clinical trials. That number may not sound dramatic at first, but consider what it means. Without any active ingredient, without any molecule designed to interrupt a pain signal or block a receptor, the body is capable of turning down its own suffering by nearly a third. That is not trivial. For someone living with chronic pain, a 30% reduction can mean the difference between a difficult day and a bearable one, between lying in bed and sitting at a table, between silence and conversation. The number is an average, of course. Some people experience more, some less, some nothing at all. But the pattern is consistent enough to appear across dozens of studies in different populations for different kinds of pain. It is a quiet testament to the body's own resilience, to the healing that begins not when the right drug arrives, but when the right belief takes root. Placebo analgesia, the technical term for pain relief produced by a placebo, has been observed in conditions including headaches, back pain, arthritis, and post-operative pain. These are not rare or exotic conditions. They are the everyday aches of human life, the pains that visit millions of people around the world, the ones that sit in waiting rooms and pharmacy lines and late-night beds. And in study after study, placebos have been shown to ease them, not cure them, not eliminate them, but soften them, like a hand placed gently over a wound. Headache patients report the throbbing fading. Back pain patients describe a loosening, a release of the tightness that grips their spine. Arthritis patients feel their joints grow a little more willing, and people recovering from surgery find sometimes that the sharp edge of their incision pain dulls a little sooner than expected. The placebo does not fix the underlying problem, but it changes the way the body experiences it, offering a kind of grace in the space between injury and healing. The size of a placebo pill can influence its effectiveness. Larger pills tend to produce a stronger placebo response than smaller ones. This may seem surprising or even strange, but it speaks to something deeply human, the way we assign meaning to physical things. A larger pill feels like more medicine. It feels like a bigger intervention, a more serious effort, a treatment that means business. And the body, it seems, responds to that interpretation. Researchers have found that when participants are given larger placebo capsules, they report greater improvement than those given smaller ones, even though neither pill contains anything of therapeutic value. It is not the size of the pill that matters, it is the size of the belief it carries. The body reads the pill the way a reader reads a book, not just for what is written, but for how it is presented, for the weight of it in the hand, for the story it seems to tell. And a larger pill tells a louder story, one the body is more inclined to believe. The color of a placebo pill matters too. Red and orange pills are often perceived as more stimulating, while blue and green pills are perceived as more calming. This has been observed in multiple studies, and it reveals something poetic about the relationship between perception and healing. We carry associations with color from the very beginning of life. Red for warmth, for urgency, for energy. Blue for cool water, for night skies, for rest. And those associations do not stop at the surface of the skin. They reach inward, influencing how the body interprets a treatment before a single molecule has been absorbed. A red pill feels like it should wake you up, speed you along, sharpen your focus. A blue pill feels like it should calm you down, slow your pulse, carry you towards sleep. And the body, ever attentive to the cues around it, adjusts accordingly. The color does nothing, chemically, but symbolically it does everything. It sets the stage for what the body expects to feel, and the body, faithful as always, follows the story it has been told. Placebo injections tend to produce stronger effects than placebo pills. The reason, researchers believe, is that injections are perceived as more serious, more potent, more medically significant than a simple tablet. There is something about the needle, the small bright sharpness of it, the ritual of swabbing the skin, the careful steadiness of the hand that holds it, that signals to the body that a powerful intervention is underway. The pill is passive. You swallow it and wait, but the injection is active. It enters the body with a kind of authority that a pill cannot match. And the placebo effect, always attuned to context, responds in kind. The brain reads the injection as a stronger message, a more urgent communication, and it adjusts its response accordingly, releasing more endorphins, dampening more pain, producing a larger shift in the way the body feels. It is the same inert substance, saline instead of sugar, but the delivery changes the meaning, and meaning in the world of the placebo is everything. Sham surgeries, where a patient is sedated and incisions are made but no actual procedure is performed, have produced significant pain relief in clinical studies. This is one of the most startling findings in all of placebo research. The patient is brought into an operating room. They are placed under anesthesia. The surgeon makes a small incision, perhaps moves instruments near the body, and then closes the wound, having done nothing at all to the structures inside. And yet, when these patients wake, many of them report improvement. They feel less pain. They move more freely. They describe the surgery as a success. Their bodies responded not to a repair, but to the story of a repair, to the weight of the operating room, the trust in the surgeon, the belief that something broken had been fixed. It is a finding that has challenged some of the most basic assumptions in orthopedic medicine, and it carries a quiet, humbling message. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a body receives in a hospital is not the procedure itself, but the belief that it was done. A landmark study published in 2002 in the New England Journal of Medicine found that sham knee surgery for osteoarthritis was just as effective as real arthroscopic surgery for relieving pain. The study, led by Dr. Bruce Moseley, divided patients into 3 groups. One received the real procedure, one received a lavage, and one received a sham surgery where incisions were made but nothing was done inside the knee. Over the following 2 years, all 3 groups reported similar levels of improvement. The patients who received the fake surgery felt just as much relief as those who received the real one. The findings were so striking that they prompted a reconsideration of arthroscopic surgery for osteoarthritis, a procedure that had been performed hundreds of thousands of times each year. It was a moment when the placebo effect did not just quietly accompany medicine, it stood beside it, matched it step for step, and asked the medical community to reconsider what it thought it knew about the relationship between cutting and healing. Patients who receive more elaborate placebo treatments, such as those involving medical devices, complex procedures, or multi-step protocols, often report greater improvement than those given simple pills. The more involved the treatment feels, the more the body responds. A pill is simple. A device that hums and glows and is operated by a technician in a lab coat is something else entirely. It carries weight. It carries narrative. It tells the body a more convincing story about the seriousness of the intervention, and the body, reading that story, invests more of its own resources in the response. Researchers call this the dose of the placebo, not a chemical dose, but a contextual one, measured in the richness of the ritual, the complexity of the procedure, the depth of the patient's belief that something truly powerful is being done. The more elaborate the performance of healing, the more the body believes in the healing itself. And belief, in this quiet theatre, is the most powerful medicine in the room. The ritual of receiving treatment, the waiting room, the white coat, the careful examination, enhances the placebo response. It is not just the pill or the injection that matters, it is everything that surrounds it. The sterile smell of the clinic, the soft rustle of paper on an examination table, the way a doctor leans forward, listens closely, and nods with a kind of focused attention that says, "I hear you, I understand." These things are not decoration, they are ingredients. Each one contributes to a felt sense of care, of being tended to, of being taken seriously. And the body responds to that sense with a cascade of its own. The waiting room primes expectation. The white coat signals authority. The examination communicates attention. And by the time the treatment arrives, whatever it may be, the body has already begun to shift, already begun to open the doors of its own pharmacy, already begun to lean toward the possibility of feeling better. The ritual is not separate from the medicine. In many ways, it is the medicine. Placebo creams applied to the skin have been shown to reduce pain sensitivity in the specific area where they are applied. This is a particularly elegant demonstration of the placebo effect because it shows that the response is not just general or diffuse, it can be targeted. When a person is told that a cream will numb a particular area and an inert cream is applied there, that specific patch of skin becomes less sensitive to pain. Not the whole body, not the opposite arm, just the place where the cream was rubbed in, with all the care and attention of a real topical anesthetic. The body reads the location of the treatment as information. It understands that the cream was placed here on this spot for this purpose, and it adjusts the pain signals from that exact region accordingly. It is as though the skin itself is listening, not just to the chemicals it absorbs, but to the meaning of the gesture, to the story told by the gentle motion of a hand spreading something cool across a tender place. Even when patients are told that a cream is just a moisturizer, the act of having a clinician apply it in a medical setting can still trigger mild placebo analgesia. This finding adds another layer to the mystery. It suggests that the placebo effect does not always require deception or even explicit medical framing. Sometimes the mere context of care is enough. A person sits in a clinic. A provider reaches for a tube, squeezes a small amount of cream into their palm, and applies it gently to the patient's skin. The cream is nothing special, everyone knows it, and yet the body responds, just a little. A faint softening of the pain, a subtle easing of the discomfort. It is as though the body is responding not to the cream, and not even to the belief that the cream is medicine, but to something deeper, to the act of being touched with intention, to the presence of someone whose role is to help, to the ancient, wordless comfort of being cared for by another human being. The placebo effect has been observed in the treatment of depression, with placebo pills producing measurable improvement in many clinical trials. Depression is not a simple condition. It lives in the chemistry of the brain, in the patterns of thought, in the way a person wakes up each morning and faces the weight of another day. And yet, in study after study, a portion of patients given a placebo, a pill with no active antidepressant inside, report feeling better. Their mood lifts, their energy returns, just a little. The heaviness eases, not entirely, but enough to notice. These are not people being foolish or naive. They are people whose brains are responding to the act of seeking help, to the hope that something might change, to the simple, powerful experience of being given a treatment by someone who says, "This might help you." And for some of them, it does. Not because of what was in the pill, but because of what was in the moment. The decision to try, the willingness to believe, and the brain's quiet willingness to follow. Some analyses suggest that a significant portion of the improvement seen with antidepressant medication may overlap with the placebo response, particularly for mild to moderate depression. This is one of the most debated findings in psychiatry, and it deserves to be stated carefully. It does not mean that antidepressants do not work. Many people benefit profoundly from them, and for severe depression, the evidence of their efficacy is strong. But for milder forms of the illness, the gap between the drug and the placebo narrows, sometimes considerably. This has led some researchers to suggest that much of what patients experience as improvement may be driven not solely by the pharmacology of the drug, but by the overlapping effects of expectation, care, and the rituals of treatment. It is a delicate finding, one that asks us to hold two truths at once: that drugs can heal, and that the context in which they are given heals too. The two are not enemies. They are partners, working side by side in the quiet, complicated work of lifting a person out of darkness. Placebo effects in depression are associated with changes in brain activity in the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. These are not abstract regions. The prefrontal cortex, as we have explored, is the part of the brain that plans, that expects, that imagines a future different from the present. And the anterior cingulate cortex sits at a crossroads between thought and emotion, helping to regulate how we feel about what we think. When a depressed person takes a placebo and begins to feel better, these areas show measurable changes on a brain scan, shifts in activity that resemble, in part, the changes produced by real antidepressant medication. The brain is not pretending, it is reorganizing. It is adjusting its own chemistry in response to the belief that change is possible, that the fog might lift, that the morning might feel different than the one before. And those adjustments, quiet as they are, leave traces on a scanner, proof that hope, when held in the right context, can move the machinery of the mind. The placebo effect has been documented in anxiety disorders, with patients reporting reduced anxiety after receiving inert treatments they believed were real medication. Anxiety lives in the body as much as in the mind. It is the tight chest, the shallow breath, the feeling of standing at the edge of something that never arrives. And placebos have been shown to ease it, not always, not completely, but meaningfully, in controlled studies where patients believed they were receiving anxiolytic medication. The person swallows a pill. They wait. And slowly, something begins to soften. The breath deepens. The chest loosens. The world feels a little less sharp. What is happening is not magic. It is the brain, primed by expectation, beginning to dial down the systems that produce the feeling of threat. The amygdala quiets, the stress hormones recede, and the person, without knowing exactly why, begins to feel the way they hoped the pill would make them feel. The body heard the promise of calm, and it began, in its own quiet way, to keep it. In irritable bowel syndrome, often called IBS, placebo treatments have been shown to significantly reduce symptoms such as pain and bloating. IBS is a condition that lives at the intersection of the gut and the brain, a place where stress and sensation are deeply intertwined. It is also one of the conditions most responsive to the placebo effect, perhaps because the gut is so sensitive to emotional and psychological states, so attuned to the signals the brain sends down through the vagus nerve and the enteric nervous system. In placebo-controlled trials, patients with IBS who received sham treatments reported meaningful relief, less cramping, less bloating, fewer episodes of the unpredictable discomfort that defines the condition. The gut, it seems, is listening. It responds not only to what we eat, but to what we feel, what we expect, and what we believe about the treatment we have been given. It is a reminder that healing does not always begin in the place where the pain is felt. Sometimes it begins in the place where belief is held. Placebo responses have been observed in patients with Parkinson's disease, producing temporary improvements in motor function. We touched on this earlier when we spoke of dopamine release in the striatum. But it is worth returning to because the implications are so deeply moving. Parkinson's disease slowly robs a person of their ability to move with ease. The hands tremble, the steps shorten, the body grows stiff and reluctant. And yet, when patients receive a placebo they believe to be their medication, some of them move more smoothly. The tremor quiets, the stride lengthens. For a brief window, the body remembers what it felt like before the disease took hold. This is not a cure. The relief is temporary, and it does not slow the progression of the illness. But it reveals something about the brain's capacity to mobilize its remaining resources when it believes that help has arrived. Even in illness, even in decline, the brain has not given up. It is still listening, still hoping, still capable of small, quiet acts of self-repair. In clinical trials for allergies, placebo treatments have been shown to reduce histamine-related symptoms in some participants. Allergies are the body's overreaction to harmless substances, pollen, dust, pet dander, and they produce familiar, miserable symptoms: sneezing, itching, watery eyes, a nose that will not stop running. These are physical responses, driven by histamine and other immune chemicals. And yet, in some studies, participants who received placebo treatments reported fewer symptoms. The sneezing slowed, the itching faded, the eyes cleared. It is not fully understood how a placebo can influence immune-mediated responses, but researchers believe it may involve the brain's ability to modulate immune activity through the nervous system and through conditioned responses, the body learning over time to associate certain cues with relief and then producing that relief even when the cue is hollow. The immune system, like the rest of the body, is not as autonomous as we once believed. It listens to the brain, and the brain, in turn, listens to belief. Placebo treatments have shown effects in studies on insomnia, with participants reporting improved sleep quality after taking inert pills. Sleep is one of the most delicate things the body does. It requires surrender, a letting go of control, of vigilance, of the waking mind's grip on the world. And insomnia is, in many ways, a failure of that surrender. The body cannot let go, the mind cannot quiet, and so the person lies awake, waiting for a sleep that will not come. In this context, the placebo effect can be especially powerful. When a person takes a pill they believe will help them sleep, the act itself becomes a kind of permission. It is a signal to the body, to the brain, to the nervous system, that sleep is allowed now, that something has been done to make it safe, and sometimes that signal is enough. The person takes the pill, lies down, and drifts, not because of what was in the capsule, but because the capsule gave them something they could not give themselves, the belief that tonight, rest will come. The placebo effect has been observed in studies on nausea, with sham treatments reducing feelings of motion sickness. Nausea is a deeply unpleasant sensation, one that seems to come from the very center of the body. from a place beyond the reach of reason or willpower. And yet placebos can touch it. In motion sickness studies, participants who received inert treatments they believed were anti-nausea medication reported feeling less queasy, less unsettled, less overwhelmed by the rocking and swaying that had made them ill. The stomach, like the gut, is intimately connected to the brain, through the vagus nerve, through the complex web of signals that link the digestive system to the emotional centers of the mind. And when the brain believes that a remedy has been given, it can send calming signals down that pathway, soothing the stomach the way a hand soothes a restless child. The nausea does not vanish entirely, but it recedes gently, like a wave pulling back from the shore, leaving the person a little steadier, a little more at peace. In asthma research, placebos have been shown to improve patients' self-reported breathing, even though objective measures like lung function may not change as dramatically. This is one of the most instructive distinctions in all of placebo research. Patients who received sham inhalers genuinely felt that their breathing had improved. They reported less tightness, less wheezing, a greater sense of air moving freely through their lungs. But when researchers measured their actual lung function using instruments that track the volume and speed of airflow, the numbers told a different story. The lungs had not opened up the way a real bronchodilator would have opened them. What had changed was the experience of breathing, not the mechanics of it. The brain had softened the sensation of distress, making the same level of airflow feel more comfortable, more sufficient, more like enough. It is a reminder that the placebo effect often works at the level of perception, changing how the body feels, even when it does not change what the body does. And that distinction, gentle as it is, matters deeply. Placebo responses have been observed in studies on chronic fatigue, with some participants reporting increased energy levels after receiving inert treatments. Chronic fatigue is a condition that wraps itself around a person like a heavy blanket, not the ordinary tiredness that follows a long day, but a deep, unshakable exhaustion that rest does not relieve. And in some clinical trials, participants who received placebos reported feeling lighter, more awake, more able to face the hours ahead. The fatigue did not disappear, but it loosened its grip, just enough for the person to move a little more freely through their day. Researchers believe this may relate in part to the way fatigue is processed in the brain, not just as a physical state, but as a perceived one, influenced by mood, expectation, and the brain's assessment of the body's resources. When a person believes they have received something that will help, the brain may adjust that assessment, recalibrating its sense of how much energy is available. The body does not gain more fuel, but it begins to spend what it has with a little less hesitation. The immune system can be influenced by conditioning, a mechanism closely related to the placebo effect. Studies have shown that immune responses can be triggered by environmental cues previously associated with real drugs. This is a remarkable finding because the immune system has long been thought of as autonomous, a self-governing army of cells and proteins that does its work without consulting the conscious mind. And yet, conditioning experiments have shown that the immune system can learn. It can associate a particular taste, a particular setting, a particular ritual with the arrival of a drug, and then reproduce part of that drug's effect when the cue alone is presented. The body learns that this taste means this response, and it begins to respond on cue even when the drug is no longer there. It is Pavlovian in a sense, the immune system salivating at the sound of a bell. But it is also something more. It is the body's way of preparing itself, of anticipating what comes next, of meeting the future with the tools it learned from the past. In one of the most well-known experiments in this area, researchers conditioned the immune systems of rats using a flavored drink paired with an immunosuppressant drug. After repeated pairings, the flavored drink alone, without any drug, was enough to suppress the rat's immune function. The study, conducted by Robert Ader and Nicholas Cohen in the 1970s, is considered a founding experiment in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, the study of how the mind, the nervous system, and the immune system interact. The rats had learned, without any conscious awareness, that the taste of the drink meant something was coming that would quiet their immune response, and their bodies obeyed that lesson, even when the drug was absent. It was a finding that shook the boundaries between psychology and immunology, suggesting that the immune system is not as independent as scientists had believed. It listens to the world around it, It learns from experience, and it responds not only to invaders and infections, but to the quiet, conditioned stories the body has been told. Placebo effects have been observed across cultures and throughout history, suggesting that the response is a deeply rooted aspect of human biology, not a product of any single medical tradition. From ancient healing rituals to modern clinical trials, from shamanic ceremonies to the sterile rooms of research hospitals, the placebo effect appears wherever humans seek and receive care. It does not belong to Western medicine alone. It does not require a particular language, a particular belief system, or a particular understanding of the body. It appears in every context where a person in distress receives something, a treatment, a ritual, a word that they believe will help. This universality suggests that the placebo effect is not a quirk of modern psychology. It is something older, something woven into the very biology of being human. The body has always known how to respond to care. Long before the first pill was pressed, long before the first clinical trial was designed, the human body was already listening for the sound of help and already beginning to heal at the sound of its arrival. A patient's expectation of improvement is one of the strongest predictors of the placebo response. This may sound simple, but it carries extraordinary weight. Of all the factors that influence whether a person will respond to a placebo, their genetics, their medical history, the nature of their condition, one of the most powerful is something entirely internal: how much they believe the treatment will work. Expectation is not a passive thing. It is an active signal sent from the thinking brain into the body, shaping the way neurons fire, the way chemicals are released, the way pain and emotion are processed. A person who expects to feel better is more likely to feel better, not because they are fooling themselves, but because the brain uses expectation as a kind of blueprint, a set of instructions for what to prepare for. And when the blueprint says relief is coming, the brain begins to build it. Brick by quiet brick, molecule by molecule, in the silent workshop of the nervous system. When doctors express confidence that a treatment will work, the placebo effect tends to be stronger. The physician's belief matters, not just the patient's. When a doctor hands over a prescription with steady eyes and says clearly and warmly that this should help, the patient's body hears that confidence and uses it. Studies have shown that the same placebo, delivered by a confident provider and by an uncertain one, produces different results. The confident delivery works better. The words do not need to be elaborate. They do not need to be poetic or dramatic. They simply need to carry conviction, because the patient is reading the doctor the way the body reads a pill. Looking for signals, looking for meaning, looking for a reason to believe. And when the doctor believes, the patient's brain takes that belief and amplifies it, using it as fuel for its own quiet machinery. The doctor's voice becomes part of the treatment. Their certainty becomes a kind of medicine, invisible but real, carried not in the bloodstream but in the space between two people. The quality of the doctor-patient relationship has been shown to significantly influence the strength of the placebo response. This goes beyond confidence. It is about warmth, about listening, about the feeling that the person sitting across from you truly sees you, truly cares about your pain, and truly wants you to feel better. Studies have demonstrated that patients who feel heard, respected, and cared for by their healthcare providers experience stronger placebo effects than those who feel rushed, dismissed, or ignored. The relationship itself becomes therapeutic. It is not a substitute for medicine, but it is a multiplier. It takes whatever treatment is given and amplifies its effect through the quiet chemistry of human connection. A doctor who listens is not just gathering information. They are building a bridge between their knowledge and the patient's body, a bridge made not of science but of trust. And across that bridge, the body receives something no prescription can provide, the deep, reassuring sense that someone is paying attention. A warm, empathetic interaction with a healthcare provider can enhance the placebo effect, even when no active treatment is given. This has been tested directly. In one well-known study on irritable bowel syndrome, researchers compared two groups, one that received a sham acupuncture treatment with minimal interaction, and one that received the same sham treatment delivered with warmth, eye contact, active listening, and expressions of empathy. The group that received the empathetic interaction showed significantly greater improvement. The needle was the same. The procedure was the same. The only difference was the quality of the human connection surrounding it. And that connection, that gentle, unhurried attention, was enough to shift the body's response. It is a finding that speaks to something ancient in us, something that predates medicine altogether. The body does not heal in isolation. It heals in relationship. It heals in the presence of someone who cares. And when that presence is felt, truly felt, the body opens itself a little wider to the possibility of feeling whole. Brand name placebos tend to produce stronger effects than generic-looking ones. This is one of the more surprising findings in placebo research, and it says something revealing about the power of perception. When a placebo is packaged to look like a well-known brand with familiar colors, recognizable logos, and professional labeling, patients report greater improvement than when they receive the same inert substance in plain, unmarked packaging. The body is not reading the ingredients, it is reading the story. And a brand name package tells a story of authority, of reliability, of something that has been tested and trusted by millions. The brain assigns meaning to the packaging before the pill ever reaches the stomach, and that meaning shapes the response. It is not vanity. It is not gullibility. It is the brain doing what it always does, scanning the environment for information, assembling expectations from every available cue, and then adjusting the body's chemistry to match. The brand name is not medicine, but the belief it carries is. More expensive placebos have been shown to produce greater effects than identical placebos described as cheaper. The same sugar pill, in the same capsule, with the same instructions, but one is described as costing significantly more than the other, and the expensive one works better. This has been demonstrated in controlled experiments, and it reveals something both fascinating and unsettling about the way the brain assigns value to treatment. Price is a signal. It says, this is serious, this is potent, this is worth something, and the brain, receiving that signal, adjusts its response accordingly. The expensive placebo activates more endorphins, produces greater pain relief, and generates a stronger sense of improvement, all because of a number on a label. It is a humbling finding. It reminds us that healing is not only a biological process, it is also an economic one, a social one, a narrative one. The story we are told about a treatment, including what it costs, becomes part of the treatment itself. A 2008 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that participants reported significantly more pain relief from a placebo described as costing $2.50 per pill than from the same placebo described as costing 10 cents. The pills were identical. The packaging was identical. The only difference was the stated price. And yet, the participants' brains responded differently, releasing more pain relief for the expensive version, less for the cheap one. The study did not merely confirm what many suspected about the psychology of pricing. It demonstrated that price perception has a direct, measurable effect on the body's neurochemistry. The brain does not evaluate a treatment in a vacuum. It evaluates it within a web of social meaning, and cost is one of the strongest threads in that web. A treatment that costs more feels like it should do more, and the body, faithful to the narrative it has been given, rises to meet that expectation. The frequency of dosing can affect the placebo response. Taking a placebo 4 times a day may produce a stronger effect than taking it once. This is because each dose is a ritual, a small, repeated act of self-care that reinforces the belief that treatment is underway. Every time a person reaches for the pill bottle, unscrews the cap, places the tablet on their tongue and swallows, they are telling their body once again that something is being done. That message accumulates. 4 times a day, the body receives 4 reminders that healing is in progress. And each reminder deepens the expectation, strengthens the association, and gives the brain another opportunity to engage its own pharmacy. It is not the substance that grows more powerful with repetition. It is the story. The more often the story is told, the more deeply the body believes it. And the more deeply it believes, the more fully it responds, turning each quiet ritual into another gentle push toward relief. Placebos given by injection or intravenous drip tend to produce stronger effects than those given orally. We touched on this earlier with injections, but the pattern holds across delivery methods. An IV drip, the slow, visible flow of liquid through a tube into a vein, carries an enormous amount of perceived medical weight. It looks serious. It feels serious. The patient can see the treatment entering their body, can feel the cool liquid moving through their veins, and can watch the drip counting down like a clock measuring the arrival of relief. All of this context amplifies the placebo response. The brain reads the IV as a powerful intervention, and it responds with a powerful expectation. The saline does nothing, chemically, but the experience of receiving it, the visual, the sensation, the ritual, does something profound. It tells the body a story of serious, dedicated medical care, and the body, ever the attentive listener, takes that story and begins to write its own ending, one that leans gently and hopefully toward feeling better. The medical environment itself contributes to the placebo effect. Hospitals, clinics, and examination rooms all serve as cues that activate the body's healing expectations. The fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the quiet hum of machines behind closed doors. These are not neutral settings. They are environments saturated with meaning, places where people go to be healed, where white coats move with purpose and instruments gleam under bright lights. And the body, entering these spaces, begins to shift. Blood pressure may lower, anxiety may ease, the nervous system may begin to move from a state of alarm toward a state of receptivity. This is conditioning at its most basic. The body has learned, through years of experience, that this kind of place is where help happens, and so it begins to prepare for help before any treatment has been given. The environment becomes a placebo in its own right, a complex, multisensory signal that primes the body for the possibility of relief. The walls themselves, in a sense, begin the healing. Cultural beliefs and attitudes toward medicine influence the strength of the placebo response, which can vary across different populations and societies. In some cultures, injections carry far more medical authority than pills, and the placebo response to injections is correspondingly stronger. In others, herbal remedies are perceived as more trustworthy than pharmaceutical ones, and placebos framed as herbal treatments may produce greater effects. The placebo effect does not operate in a cultural vacuum. It is shaped by the stories a society tells about healing, who heals, how healing happens, and what forms of treatment are worthy of trust. A person raised to believe in the power of a particular healing tradition will respond more strongly to placebos that fit within that tradition. It is not superstition, it is the brain using every piece of available information, including cultural knowledge, to set its expectations and shape its response. The placebo effect is universal, but its expression is local, colored by the beliefs and practices of the world each person inhabits. In some studies, the color white, associated in many Western cultures with purity, cleanliness, and medicine, has enhanced the perceived effectiveness of placebo pills. A white pill, in these contexts, looks like medicine. It carries the unspoken suggestion of pharmaceutical precision, of careful formulation, of something designed in a laboratory to do exactly what it promises, and the brain responds to that suggestion. Participants given white placebos have, in some studies, reported slightly greater improvement than those given placebos of other colors, though the findings vary and color effects are always intertwined with cultural associations and individual expectations. Still, the pattern is revealing. It tells us that even something as simple as the shade of a tablet can influence the body's response. The brain is reading every signal, every detail, every shade and texture, assembling a story about what this treatment is and what it will do. And the color white, in the right cultural context, tells a story of authority, of science, of clean, quiet power. Conditioning plays a major role in the placebo effect. If a person has previously experienced relief from a certain type of treatment, they are more likely to respond to a placebo that mimics it. This is the body's memory at work. It remembers that the last time a pill of this shape arrived, the pain faded. It remembers that the last time a doctor spoke in this tone, the anxiety softened. And when a similar cue appears again, even if the treatment is inert, the body reaches into its memory, pulls out the associated response and begins to produce it. This is not foolishness. This is learning. It is the same mechanism that makes a dog salivate at the sound of a bell, the same deep, ancient process by which the body prepares for what it has been taught to expect. Conditioning is one of the two great pillars of the placebo effect, alongside expectation. Expectation points forward, toward what we hope will happen. Conditioning points backward, toward what we have learned. Together, they form a bridge between past and future, and the body walks across it, guided by the quiet wisdom of its own experience. Even the language used to describe a treatment can alter its placebo effect. Words like powerful, fast-acting, and clinically proven enhance expectation and strengthen the body's response. Language is not decoration, it is information. When a person hears that their treatment is powerful, the brain adjusts its expectation upward. When they hear that it is fast-acting, the brain begins to anticipate relief sooner. When they hear that it has been clinically proven, the brain assigns it a weight of authority that amplifies the entire response. These are not conscious calculations. The person does not sit and think, "This word means I should expect more relief." The response is automatic, processed in the deep, fast-moving layers of the brain that assign meaning to everything they encounter. Language shapes the placebo the way wind shapes a flame, invisibly, constantly, from every direction at once. And the body, always listening, always interpreting, always preparing for what it believes is coming, takes those words and builds from them a quiet architecture of expectation, one that the brain will try, faithfully and gently, to fulfill. Open-label placebos are placebos given to patients who are fully informed that the treatment contains no active ingredient. There is no deception, no hidden agenda. The patient knows with complete clarity that the pill they are about to take is made of nothing, no drug, no compound, no molecule with any known therapeutic purpose, and yet they take it anyway. This is one of the most fascinating corners of placebo research because it challenges the very foundation of what we thought we knew about how placebos work. For decades, the assumption was simple. Placebos require belief, and belief requires not knowing. If the patient knows the pill is fake, the spell breaks, the magic disappears. But open-label placebos have shown us that the story is not that simple. Something else is at work here, something deeper than deception, something that lives not in the belief that a drug is real, but in the act of taking it, the ritual of swallowing, the relationship with the provider, and the body's ancient responsiveness to the gestures of care. Remarkably, open-label placebos have still been shown to produce significant improvements in several medical conditions. This is not a marginal finding, it is a pattern replicated in multiple studies across different populations and different illnesses. People who know they are taking a placebo still get better, not as much as those on real medication in most cases, but meaningfully better than those who receive no treatment at all. The improvement shows up in symptom scores, in quality of life measures, in the daily rhythms of pain and discomfort that define a person's experience of illness. It is a finding that has unsettled some researchers and electrified others because it suggests that the placebo effect is more robust, more layered, and more deeply woven into the biology of healing than anyone had imagined. The body does not require deception to respond. It requires something else, something harder to name, something closer to the simple, stubborn willingness to participate in the act of healing even when the mind knows the pill is empty. A 2010 study led by Ted Kapchuk at Harvard University found that patients with irritable bowel syndrome who knowingly took open-label placebos reported significantly greater symptom relief than those who received no treatment at all. The study was carefully designed. Patients were told clearly and honestly that the pills contained no active ingredient. They were told the pills were made of inert substances, like sugar. And they were told that clinical research had shown that placebos could still trigger the body's own healing mechanisms. Then they took the pills twice a day for 3 weeks. And at the end of those 3 weeks, the open-label placebo group showed measurably greater improvement in their IBS symptoms, less pain, less bloating, less disruption to their daily lives. It was a landmark study, one that opened a new chapter in placebo research and suggested that honesty and healing are not as opposed as medicine had long believed. The body, it seems, does not need to be tricked. It needs to be invited. Open-label placebos have shown positive effects in studies on chronic lower back pain. Chronic back pain is one of the most common and most stubborn forms of suffering in the modern world. It resists treatment. It recurs. It becomes part of a person's identity in a way that few other conditions do. And yet, in studies where patients were given open-label placebos with full knowledge of what they were taking, some of them reported meaningful relief. The pain did not vanish, but it softened. It became a little less central, a little less commanding, a little less likely to define the shape of their day. Researchers believe that the act of taking the pill combined with the framing provided by the clinician, the explanation that the body has its own healing capacity, that the ritual of treatment can activate it, was enough to engage the brain's pain modulation systems. The back did not change, but the brain's relationship to the pain did, and that shift, subtle as it was, made a difference that the patients could feel. Research has found that open-label placebos can reduce fatigue in cancer survivors. Cancer survival is a triumph, but it is not the end of the story. Many survivors live with lasting fatigue, a deep, pervasive exhaustion that lingers long after treatment has ended and the disease has gone. It is not ordinary tiredness. It is a bone-deep weariness that does not respond to rest. And in studies exploring new ways to address this fatigue, open-label placebos have shown promise. Patients who knowingly took inert pills within the context of a supportive clinical relationship reported reduced fatigue and improved quality of life. The pills gave them nothing chemically, but the act of taking them, the routine, the ritual, the partnership with a provider who acknowledged their suffering, gave them something the body could use, a signal, a rhythm, a daily reminder that they were doing something for themselves, that healing was still in progress, that the body's own resources had not been exhausted by the battle it had already fought. Open-label placebos have also been studied in the context of allergic rhinitis, with some participants reporting symptom improvement despite knowing the treatment was inert. Allergic rhinitis, the sneezing, the congestion, the itchy eyes that arrive with every change of season, is a condition driven by the immune system's overzealous response to harmless particles. And yet even here, in a condition with clear immunological roots, the open-label placebo found something to work with. Participants who took the pills reported fewer symptoms, less discomfort, a greater sense of being able to breathe. The finding is preliminary and the mechanisms are not fully understood, but it adds to the growing body of evidence that the placebo effect does not require ignorance to function. It can operate in the light of full awareness as long as the context is right, as long as there is a provider who explains, a ritual that anchors, and a body that is willing, even with open eyes, to lean toward the possibility of feeling better. The effectiveness of open-label placebos challenges the long-held assumption that deception is necessary for the placebo effect to work. For most of the history of placebo research, this assumption was considered a given. The patient must not know. If they know, it will not work. This was not questioned because it seemed so obviously true. How could a sugar pill help someone who knows it is sugar? And yet the evidence now tells a different story. Open-label placebos work, at least in some conditions, at least for some people, and that changes the conversation in important ways. It means the placebo effect is not primarily about deception. It is about something more fundamental, something about the body's response to ritual, to relationship, to the act of being cared for and choosing to participate in that care. Deception may enhance the effect in many cases, but it is not the engine. The engine is older and deeper, and it runs on something closer to willingness than to ignorance. Researchers believe open-label placebos may work in part through the ritual of pill-taking, the patient-provider interaction, and the positive expectation framing that accompanies the treatment. When a clinician explains the open-label placebo to a patient, they do not simply say, "Here is a fake pill." They say something more nuanced. They explain that the body has its own healing capacity. They describe the research that shows placebos can work even when people know they are placebos. They frame the treatment not as a deception, but as a collaboration between the patient's body and the ritual of care. And this framing matters. It sets the stage. It creates a kind of expectation that is different from the blind belief of a traditional placebo. It is an informed expectation, a hope grounded in knowledge rather than ignorance. The patient is not being tricked into healing. They are being invited to participate in it with open eyes and full understanding. And the body, receiving that invitation, responds, not because it has been fooled, but because it has been asked. The instructions given with open-label placebos often emphasize the body's natural capacity for self-healing, which may prime the placebo response. This is a subtle but important detail. When patients are told that their bodies already possess the ability to heal, that the placebo is simply a way of activating that ability, something shifts. The focus moves from the pill to the person. The patient is no longer a passive recipient of a treatment. They are an active participant in their own healing, a person whose body carries within it the tools for repair, the chemistry for relief, the ancient evolved machinery that has been keeping humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years. This framing does not guarantee a response, but it creates the conditions for one. It gives the brain a story it can work with, not a story about a powerful drug, but a story about a powerful body. And the brain, hearing that story, begins to act on it, reaching for its own endorphins, its own dopamine, its own quiet reserves of self-repair, as if someone had simply reminded it that they were there all along. Open-label placebo research is still a growing field, with ongoing studies exploring its potential applications in clinical care. We are, in a sense, at the beginning of a new chapter, one that asks not how we can trick the body into healing, but how we can invite it. Researchers are exploring whether open-label placebos could be used alongside conventional treatments to enhance their effectiveness. They are studying whether they might help in conditions where current treatments are limited, or whether side effects of medication are a concern. They are asking whether the rituals of medicine, the daily pills, the follow-up visits, the partnership between patient and provider, carry therapeutic value in their own right, independent of the chemicals they deliver. The answers are still coming. The data is still being gathered, but the direction is clear, and it points toward a medicine that is more honest, more collaborative, and more attuned to the body's own extraordinary capacity to participate in its own care. It is a hopeful direction, and like all the best science, it begins with a willingness to be surprised. The nocebo effect is the opposite of the placebo effect. It occurs when negative expectations lead to worsening symptoms or the appearance of new side effects, even when no active substance has been given. If the placebo effect is the body's quiet ability to heal itself through belief, the nocebo effect is its shadow, the body's equally quiet ability to harm itself through fear. The two are mirror images, born from the same mechanism, powered by the same pathways, and separated only by the direction of the expectation. Where the placebo says, "This will help," the nocebo says, "This will hurt." And the body, faithful as always, listens to both. It does not distinguish between positive expectations and negative ones. It simply responds, adjusting its chemistry, its pain processing, its hormonal balance, to match the story it has been told. The nocebo effect is not well known outside of medical research, but it is profoundly important. It tells us that the same power that allows belief to heal can also allow fear to wound. The body is always listening, and it hears everything. The word nocebo comes from the Latin meaning "I shall harm." It is the dark twin of placebo, which means "I shall please." Together, the two words form a pair that captures one of the deepest truths about the human body, that expectation is not neutral. It has direction. It has consequences. And those consequences are real, measurable, and physiological. The placebo pleases, the nocebo harms, and the body, sitting between them, responds to whichever voice speaks louder in a given moment. The Latin roots are elegant in their simplicity, but the reality they describe is anything but simple. Behind each word lies a web of neuroscience, psychology, and lived experience that researchers are only beginning to untangle. What we know so far is this: the body's response to expectation is one of the most powerful forces in medicine. And like all powerful forces, it can move in more than one direction. It can carry a person toward relief, or it can carry them towards suffering. The difference, more often than not, lies in the story they were told. In clinical trials, participants receiving placebos often report side effects that were listed on the consent form, even though they received no active substance. Before a clinical trial begins, participants are given a document that describes the potential side effects of the treatment: nausea, headache, dizziness, fatigue, and so on. This is an ethical requirement designed to ensure informed consent. But it has an unintended consequence. By reading about the side effects, participants develop expectations, and those expectations in some cases become self-fulfilling. Participants who received nothing more than a sugar pill report the very symptoms they were warned about. Their heads ache, their stomachs turn, they feel tired, dizzy, or unwell. The consent form, designed to protect them, has inadvertently planted a seed of expectation, and the body, following that seed, has produced the fruit. It is a paradox that sits at the heart of medical ethics. The obligation to inform can sometimes create the very harm it seeks to prevent, not through negligence, but through the sheer power of the body's attentiveness to what it is told. The nocebo effect can produce real physical symptoms, including headaches, nausea, dizziness, and fatigue, triggered entirely by negative expectation. These are not imaginary symptoms. They are not exaggerations or pleas for attention. They are real sensations produced by real neurobiological processes and experienced with the same intensity and discomfort as symptoms triggered by actual illness or medication. The person who develops a headache after being warned about headaches is not making it up. Their brain has processed the warning as a prediction, activated the neural pathways associated with headache pain, and produced the sensation accordingly. The headache is as real as any other headache they have ever had. The only difference is its origin. It was born not from a virus or a toxin, but from a word, a warning, a sentence on a consent form. The nocebo effect reminds us that the body does not always wait for a physical cause before it produces a physical experience. Sometimes the cause is invisible. Sometimes the cause is a belief, and the body treats that belief with the same seriousness it treats everything else. Being warned about potential side effects of a medication can increase the likelihood that a patient will experience those side effects, even with a placebo. This has been demonstrated in carefully controlled studies. 2 groups of patients receive the same inert pill. One group is told the pill may cause nausea. The other is told nothing about side effects, and the group that was warned about nausea is significantly more likely to feel nauseated. The pill is the same. The bodies are comparable. The only difference is the information, the story told before the pill was swallowed. And that story in the nocebo group becomes a kind of instruction, a blueprint the brain follows with the same quiet obedience it brings to placebo responses. This finding has important implications for how doctors communicate with patients. The words a physician uses when prescribing a treatment are not simply informational, they are formative. They shape the patient's experience before the treatment even begins. And the wrong words, delivered without care, without nuance, without attention to their power, can become a kind of harm. The nocebo effect has been observed in studies where participants were told that a harmless substance could cause pain, and they subsequently reported feeling pain. In one line of research, participants were exposed to a completely inert stimulus, a substance with no irritating properties, a device with no active function, and told that it might cause discomfort. And many of them felt it. They reported stinging, burning, aching, or pressure in the area where the substance was applied. Their pain was not being invented or performed. Brain scans showed activity in the same pain processing regions that light up during real pain: the thalamus, the insula, the anterior cingulate cortex. The brain had taken the verbal warning, converted it into an expectation of harm, and then produced the corresponding experience. The skin had not been touched by anything dangerous. The nerves had not been stimulated by anything sharp. But the brain, hearing the story of pain, decided to tell it to the body, and the body felt it, every bit as vividly as if the threat had been real. Negative news coverage or social media reports about a medication's side effects can amplify the nocebo effect across entire populations. This is the nocebo effect at scale. When a news story warns that a particular drug causes a rare but frightening side effect, people who are taking that drug, or who are about to start, may begin to experience symptoms they would not otherwise have noticed. The warning spreads through television screens, through phone notifications, through conversations at dinner tables and in break rooms. And with each retelling, the expectation grows. People become vigilant. They begin scanning their bodies for signs of the predicted harm, and in some cases they find them, not because the drug is causing the problem, but because the expectation is. Researchers have documented this phenomenon in the context of medication switches, where patients moved from brand-name drugs to identical generics and reported new side effects driven largely by concern and negative media attention. The nocebo effect does not need a doctor's office to operate. It can travel through the air, through the news, through the whispered fears of a population primed to expect the worst. The nocebo effect involves neurobiological pathways related to anxiety and the anticipation of harm, including the activation of cholecystokinin pathways. We met cholecystokinin earlier, CCK, the hormone linked to anxiety and dread. In the nocebo response, CCK rises. It amplifies the body's alarm system, heightening sensitivity to pain, sharpening the edges of discomfort, and creating a physiological state in which suffering is more easily produced. The brain, expecting harm, calls on its own anxiety chemistry to prepare for it, and that preparation, ironically, becomes the harm itself. The body braces, the muscles tighten, the pain threshold drops. And symptoms that might otherwise have gone unnoticed suddenly become loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. CCK is not the only molecule involved, but it is a powerful one, and its role in the nocebo effect has been well established. It is the chemical signature of the body's anticipation of something bad, and it reminds us that dread is not just an emotion. It is a physiological state, as real and as measurable as the calm that the placebo effect produces. Healthcare providers can unintentionally trigger nocebo effects through negative framing, for example, saying, "This will hurt," rather than "You may feel some pressure." The difference between these two sentences is subtle, but to the body it is enormous. "This will hurt" is a prediction of pain. It tells the brain to prepare for suffering, to activate its alarm systems, to lower its pain threshold. "You may feel some pressure" is a reframe. It acknowledges sensation without defining it as painful, giving the brain room to interpret the experience more gently. Studies have shown that the language used by healthcare providers directly influences how much pain patients report during procedures. The same needle, the same injection, the same moment, but the words spoken before it determine, in part, how the body receives it. This is not about lying to patients or withholding information. It is about understanding that language is a medical instrument, as precise and as consequential as a scalpel. And like any instrument, it must be used with care, because the body is listening, always listening, and it will build its experience from whatever words it is given. Awareness of the nocebo effect is increasingly influencing how doctors communicate with patients about treatment risks. This is a quiet revolution happening in examining rooms and medical schools around the world. Physicians are being taught to think more carefully about the words they use, not to withhold information, but to deliver it in a way that minimizes unnecessary harm. Instead of listing every possible side effect in a flat, clinical tone, some doctors are learning to contextualize the information, to emphasize the likelihood of benefit alongside the possibility of risk, to frame the experience in language that acknowledges the patient's agency and resilience. The goal is not dishonesty. The goal is precision, a recognition that the way information is delivered is itself a form of treatment, and that careless delivery can produce real, measurable suffering. The nocebo effect has taught medicine something humbling, that words are not neutral, they are active, they shape the body's response to care, and the more carefully they are chosen, the less harm they do, and the more room they leave for the body to lean gently and hopefully toward healing. The ethical use of placebos in clinical practice is an ongoing debate in medicine. At the heart of the debate is a deceptively simple question. Is it ever acceptable for a doctor to give a patient a treatment they know will not work in the traditional pharmacological sense? On one side are those who argue that any form of deception, even well-intentioned deception, violates the trust that must exist between a physician and a patient. If a doctor prescribes a sugar pill and tells the patient it is medicine, something sacred is broken, no matter how much the patient improves. On the other side are those who point to the growing body of evidence showing that placebos can produce real, measurable healing, and who ask whether it is ethical to withhold that healing simply because its mechanism is unfamiliar. The debate is not settled. It may never be. But it is a debate worth having because it forces medicine to reckon with something it has long avoided. The possibility that the boundaries between real treatment and symbolic treatment are not as clear as they once seemed. Some ethicists argue that placebos could be used ethically in cases where the patient is informed, as with open-label placebos, or in cases where no effective standard treatment exists. This is a more nuanced position than it may first appear. It does not advocate for widespread deception. It advocates for honesty, the kind of honesty that says, we do not have a drug that can cure this condition, but we do know that the body has its own healing capacity, and this ritual may help activate it. In this framing, the placebo is not a lie. It is a tool offered transparently in the context of a relationship built on trust. And for conditions where conventional medicine has little to offer, certain forms of chronic pain, fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome, the ethical calculus shifts. The question becomes not whether it is right to offer a placebo, but whether it is right to withhold one, especially when the patient understands what they are receiving and consents to it freely. The ethics of the placebo, like the effect itself, are layered, nuanced, and deeply human. The American Medical Association holds that the use of placebos in clinical practice requires careful consideration and transparency. Their position acknowledges the complexity of the issue. They do not outright prohibit the use of placebos by practicing physicians, but they emphasize the importance of honesty, informed consent, and the patient's right to know what they are receiving. The AMA recognizes that placebos can have real effects, but also that the use of deceptive treatments risks undermining the trust that is foundational to the practice of medicine. It is a cautious stance, and a wise one. It asks physicians to weigh the potential benefits against the potential harms, not just the physical harms, but the relational ones, the damage that could be done to a patient's faith in their doctor if they discovered they had been deliberately misled. Trust, after all, is its own kind of medicine, and once broken, it is not easily restored. The AMA's guidance is a reminder that in medicine, as in life, the way something is given matters as much as what is given. Placebos are considered essential in clinical trials for determining whether a new drug is truly effective beyond the body's natural response to treatment. Without placebos, medicine would have no way of knowing whether a drug works because of its chemistry or because of the body's own response to the act of being treated. Every new medication would be tested against nothing, and every improvement would be attributed to the drug, even if the body would have produced the same improvement on its own. The placebo control group is what keeps medicine honest. It is the quiet check, the invisible standard, the reminder that the body is always doing something, always fluctuating, always healing, always responding to context, and that a drug must do more than ride that natural wave. It must rise above it. This is why placebos are essential. Not because they are treatments, but because they are mirrors, reflecting back to medicine the true baseline of the body's own capacity and challenging every new drug to prove that it offers something beyond what the body can already do for itself. In some medical conditions, the placebo response in clinical trials has grown stronger over recent decades, making it increasingly difficult for new drugs to outperform placebos in clinical research. This is one of the most puzzling trends in modern pharmaceutical development. New drugs are not necessarily getting weaker, but the placebo response against which they are measured appears, in some cases, to be getting stronger, particularly in trials conducted in the United States. The reasons are not fully understood, but researchers have proposed several contributing factors: larger and longer clinical trials, which increase the opportunity for the placebo effect to develop, more elaborate medical rituals surrounding the trials, greater patient expectations driven by advertising and media, and changes in how patients are recruited and counseled. Whatever the cause, the practical consequence is striking. The bar that new drugs must clear is rising, not because of stricter regulations, but because the body's own baseline response to the ritual of treatment is climbing higher. The placebo is, in a sense, getting better at its job. A 2015 study found that the placebo response in pain trials conducted in the United States had increased significantly since the 1990s, though this trend was not observed to the same degree in European trials. The study, published in the journal Pain, analyzed data from dozens of clinical trials over several decades and found a clear upward trend in the US placebo response, a trend that made it harder and harder for new painkillers to demonstrate a significant advantage over sugar pills. In Europe, the trend was less pronounced. Researchers speculated that the difference might be related to the nature of US clinical trials, which tend to be larger, longer, and more heavily resourced, as well as to cultural differences in patient expectations and the influence of direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising, which is permitted in the United States but not in most European countries. The finding is a reminder that the placebo effect is not fixed. It is not a constant. It is a living, changing phenomenon shaped by culture, by context, and by the evolving relationship between patients and the systems that treat them. Genetics may play a role in how strongly a person responds to placebos. Variations in genes related to dopamine and opioid pathways have been linked to differences in placebo responsiveness. This is a relatively new area of research, but the early findings are compelling. Some people seem to be genetically predisposed to stronger placebo responses. Their brains may produce more dopamine in response to expectation, or their opioid systems may be more readily activated by the rituals of care. These genetic variations do not determine whether a person will respond to a placebo, but they may influence how strongly they respond and in what conditions. It is a humbling finding because it suggests that the placebo effect is not purely psychological. It is also biological, written in part into the very code of our DNA. The body's response to belief is not just a matter of mindset or willpower. It is a matter of chemistry, and that chemistry varies from person to person, shaped by the unique genetic inheritance each of us carries. The placebo effect, it turns out, is not one size fits all. It is as individual as the person it moves through. The concept of a placebome, a set of genes that may predict an individual's placebo response, has been proposed by researchers seeking to understand why some people respond strongly to placebos while others do not. The term is modeled after genome and microbiome, and it reflects a growing recognition that the placebo effect has a biological substrate, a set of molecular and genetic factors that influence its strength and character. Researchers are working to identify the specific genes involved, mapping the pathways that connect expectation to neurochemistry to symptom relief. If they succeed, the implications could be profound. It might one day be possible to predict, before a clinical trial begins, which participants are likely to respond strongly to placebos, and to account for that in the design of the study. It might also be possible to identify patients who are especially responsive to the rituals of care and to tailor treatment plans that harness that responsiveness. The placebome is still a concept more than a map, but it points toward a future in which the placebo effect is not just acknowledged but understood, at the level of the gene, the neuron, and the individual. Children tend to show stronger placebo responses than adults in many clinical trials. This is a consistent finding across multiple areas of medicine, and it carries a kind of quiet tenderness. Children are by nature more trusting. They are more open to the authority of caregivers, more willing to believe that the medicine they are given will work, more responsive to the rituals of care. The gentle voice of a nurse, the reassuring hand of a parent, the brightly colored capsule placed in their small palm. Their brains are also more plastic, more adaptable, more responsive to new experiences and new expectations. All of these factors may contribute to a stronger placebo response. The child's body, it seems, is especially attuned to the signals of care, especially willing to respond when someone says, "This will make you feel better." It is not that children are more gullible, it is that they are more open. Their nervous systems are still learning the world, still building the associations that will shape their responses for a lifetime. And in that openness, the placebo effect finds especially fertile ground. The placebo effect is not limited to humans. Placebo-like responses have been observed in animals through conditioned learning. This finding strips the placebo effect of any remaining mysticism and places it squarely in the realm of biology. Animals do not believe in medicine. They do not understand the concept of treatment. They cannot be told that a pill will help them. And yet, when they are conditioned, when they learn to associate a particular cue with a particular outcome, their bodies respond to the cue alone, even when the outcome is no longer delivered. A rat that has been given a pain-relieving drug alongside a specific flavor will later show reduced pain responses when given the flavor alone. A dog that has received immunosuppressive medication alongside a particular taste will later show immune changes in response to the taste without the drug. These are not beliefs. They are learned associations etched into the nervous system by experience, and they tell us that the placebo effect, at its deepest level, is not about faith or hope or the power of positive thinking. It is about the body's fundamental ability to learn, to predict, and to prepare for what it expects, a capacity shared by every nervous system complex enough to remember. Some researchers believe the placebo effect may have evolved as a way for the body to conserve energy, activating its healing responses only when contextual cues signal that recovery is safe and supported. This is an evolutionary hypothesis, and like all such hypotheses, it is speculative, but it is also elegant. The idea is this: healing is expensive. It requires energy, resources, and the diversion of attention from other survival tasks. A body in danger, fleeing a predator, enduring a famine, navigating a hostile environment, cannot afford to invest fully in recovery. It must wait, it must conserve, and it must look for signals that the environment is safe enough to begin the slow, costly work of repair. The placebo effect in this view is one of those signals. The presence of a caregiver, the ritual of treatment, the feeling of being in a safe, supported place, these are the cues the body has been waiting for. They say, the danger has passed. You are cared for. You can begin to heal now. And the body, receiving that message, unlocks its own healing resources and begins the quiet, ancient work of putting itself back together. The study of the placebo effect is reshaping how scientists understand the relationship between mind, brain, and body. For centuries, Western medicine has tended to treat the mind and the body as separate entities. The body as a machine, the mind as something else, something ephemeral, something that observes but does not intervene. The placebo effect challenges that division at every level. It shows that the mind does intervene, that expectation changes brain chemistry, that belief alters immune function, that the act of hoping can produce the same neurological activity as the act of taking a drug. The boundary between mind and body, once thought to be clear, turns out to be porous, shifting, and in many places non-existent. What the placebo effect has given science is not just a phenomenon to study, but a new way of thinking about what a human being is. Not a mind riding a body, but a single integrated system in which thoughts become chemistry, beliefs become biology, and the act of caring for someone becomes, in a very real sense, a form of medicine. Every time a person feels comforted by the presence of a caregiver, part of what they experience may be a form of the placebo response, the body responding to the simple belief that help has arrived. Think of a child who falls and scrapes their knee and runs to a parent who kneels down, brushes off the dirt and says, "You're okay, let me see." The crying slows, the breathing steadies, the pain still there begins to retreat. This is not just emotional comfort. There is a biological dimension to it, a shift in the nervous system, a quieting of the stress response, a release of chemicals that soothe and settle the body. The parent has not given the child a drug, they have given something else, their presence, their attention, their calm. And the child's body has responded to that gift the way it responds to any signal of safety, by beginning to heal. This is the placebo effect at its most natural, its most ancient, its most human. It does not live only in hospitals and laboratories. It lives in every act of care, in every moment when one person shows up for another and says, without needing words, "I am here." And the body, hearing that, begins to rest. The placebo effect reveals that the human body is always listening, to words, to rituals, to the quiet language of hope. Every fact we have explored tonight has pointed in its own way toward this single truth. The body does not wait passively for medicine to arrive. It is active, attentive, exquisitely sensitive to the world around it. It reads the color of a pill and adjusts its expectation. It hears the confidence in a doctor's voice and releases endorphins. It feels the touch of a hand and quiets its alarms. It responds to the size of a capsule, the cost of a treatment, the warmth of a smile, the ritual of a waiting room. It responds to everything, not because it is gullible, but because it was built to respond. The body evolved in a world where survival depended on reading signals, on predicting what was coming, on preparing for the future based on the information available. And the placebo effect is simply that system, still running, still listening, still doing what it has always done, interpreting the world and adjusting accordingly, with a faithfulness that is, when you stop to think about it, quietly breathtaking. Research has shown that placebo responses can be transferred through social observation. Watching another person experience relief from a treatment can increase the observer's own placebo response when they later receive the same treatment. This is called observational learning, and it adds yet another layer to the already rich tapestry of the placebo effect. It is not enough for the body to learn from its own experience. It also learns from watching others. If a person sees someone take a pill and visibly relax, their brain files that information away, and when they later take the same pill, their body draws on that observation to shape its own response. The neurons mirror. The expectation builds. The body prepares for the relief it watched someone else receive. It is a social phenomenon, a communal one, a reminder that human healing has never been a solitary act. We heal in groups, in families, in the presence of others whose experiences teach our bodies what to expect. The placebo effect is not just individual, it is shared. It moves between people, carried not by molecules but by something older. The simple, powerful act of witnessing another person find relief and allowing the body to believe that the same relief might be possible for you. And so we arrive at the end of our quiet journey, 101 facts later, and perhaps a little closer to something that cannot quite be named. What the placebo effect teaches us, if we are willing to listen, is that the body is not a machine waiting for instruction. It is a living thing, always attending, always responding, always leaning, gently, faithfully, toward the possibility of feeling whole. And tonight, as your breathing deepens and the last of the waking world begins to soften at the edges, know this: even now, your body is listening. It is tending to you the way it always has, with a quiet devotion that needs no pill, no prescription, no proof. Sleep well. You are and always have been in good hands, your own.